Chef Tony Bozzella is in the kitchen. Got a giant recruit, and we talk about the Big East schedule. Next on Pirate Vibes. Let's vibe. Welcome to the latest and greatest episode of Pirate Vibes on the Big East Energy Network. Brought to you by Osabasa Spice. Go to osabasaspice.com. Use promo code BIGENERGY15 for 15% off your first order. We haven't done it in a while, Patrick. I'm, of course, joined by Patrick Madden. Hot off the press is his Big East preview, right? On the Big East blog.
That is correct.
You talked about it on the men's show, but I guess we're on the women's show now, so you might as well put it out there.
Yes, I did a two-part series. Part one was Connecticut on Tuesday. Part two was sort of like the rest of the Big East. Put some storylines in there. Gave you my power rankings for the whole conference. Gave you my all Big East team. Jada Eads is on it because I focus a lot on the returners, but also she is one of the maybe three best point guards in the league. I think the conversation of the best point guards in the Big East is Azzi Fudd of Connecticut, Jasmine Basco of Villanova, and then Jada Eads. So in that sense, I think that she's going to be the star along with Savannah Catalan, and I projected Seton Hall to be third because I think Seton Hall has the best, maybe the second best returning experience in the league. And I think that means something because a lot of the other rosters beneath them have a lot of new pieces coming in. And I think it's going to take them a while to figure things out. Whereas I think Tony Bozzella and his group should get off the ground running and should be ready to go and will not be a work in progress because Big East play starts relatively early on the women's side. Connecticut, I think, is playing their first game right after Thanksgiving, and then Seton Hall plays its first Big East game a few days after that against Butler at Walsh Gym.
Yeah, let's dive right into it. The Big East schedule right here on your screen. We talked about it with, actually, Bozzella gave us the rundown of the non-conference before it came out. Now let's talk about the conference. Obviously, everyone plays a home and home. You talked about that Butler game right off the bat. How excited are you for that Butler game? It's right before NC State, correct?
Actually, there's a stretch of non-conference games between Butler and when Seton Hall, Seton Hall's second Big East game is a big one at Villanova a week, the 19th, which would be about 6 days before Christmas. And, of course, interestingly enough, the same night that Seton Hall begins the men's Big East schedule up at Providence. So you've got the stretch after that Butler game features NC State on the road. And, NC State, their reputation speaks for itself. Then they bring in Columbia at home. And Columbia has been sort of a thorn in Seton Hall's side. I think they made the NCAA tournament last year. When Coach Bozzella was on with us during the summer, he spoke very highly about the women's basketball in the Ivy League. We not only play Columbia at home, but we also, right before that Butler game on December the 2nd, we're playing at Princeton. So because those Ivy League schools did very well in the selection process, those are two very important games in terms of Seton Hall's NCAA resume. Then we get to the 13th. They're playing Auburn, an SEC school, at home. And then we get to the 16th where they're playing Washington State at home. And then you get to that Villanova game. So, it's sort of weird that Butler game sort of falls in a sandwich amongst a bunch of very good non-conference games. But again, you don't want to sleep on Butler because ultimately, at the end of the day, that Butler game means something in your league standings. So if you want to get the 2 or the 3 seed and stay away from Connecticut's half of the bracket when you get to the Big East tournament, you cannot afford to take a loss to a good Butler team, but not a Butler team a lot of people expect is going to be contending for, let's say, the top 4 of the league this season.
Yeah, definitely. I think Bozzella came on and said that he wanted a schedule that was competitive all the way through. Right, he talked about the Ivy League team, but he also talked about Auburn and Washington State. So those games are vital for this team. He also talked about how he needs to keep the games close with UConn and last year was Creighton, one of the top teams. Do you see Creighton? You kind of dove into the women's side a little bit more. Do you see Creighton still maintaining that number 2 spot, or do you see someone else?
I picked Marquette second place.
We go in there. I just was curious if there's a difference.
Right. No, Marquette is bringing back, interestingly enough, if you make the comparison between what Kara Casanagua is doing up at Marquette on the women's side and what Shaka Smart is doing on the men's side, they're bringing back, I think, 4 of their starters. Yeah. And that team came in a tie for 4th place last season and made it to the Big East Conference semifinals. So that's a very good team that if they get a few games better this season will almost be a lock for the NCAA tournament. And obviously that second place position opens up a little bit because Creighton lost. I think Creighton lost 4 starters and 4 starters who had been with the program for 4 or more seasons. So Jim Flannery at Creighton has a big rebuilding job. Now, I didn't study his team as closely as I would have liked to. He's got a lot of talent, but it's a lot of young talent. Yeah. So in that sense, I think that Creighton is I hate that, no offense to anybody who's a Creighton women's fan, but they're going to take a little bit of a step back this season. I don't expect them to dive all the way at the bottom of the conference, where the DePauls and the Xaviers sit on the women's side. But, they're probably going to have to play the Friday of the Big East Women's Tournament. That doesn't mean they won't be dangerous at that time of the season because Flannery is, Flannery's a great coach. And Flannery's going to have them playing at a much higher level when we get to March than when we get to, let's say, January.
Yeah. So obviously my next question was, is it an advantage to get Creighton on the 22nd when you have to go to Omaha? And obviously the answer is going to be yes. Let's look at the UConn games. Because obviously, like Coach Bozzella said, they got to keep it close. And I know one game last year, they kept it close for most before the wheels fell off. The 3rd of January, we head up to Connecticut, and they come back on the 25th of January. So within a 3-week time span, just about. First of all, obviously, you're a frequent goer of Seton Hall women's team. Have you been to a UConn game in the Walsh yet?
Years ago.
We got that's our new mission here on Pirate Vibes. Patrick Madden to Walsh for a UConn game. That's the new hashtag. Patrick to Walsh.
I think if I talk to Matt Sweeney, I think if I reach out to Matt Sweeney, I could probably get myself in the door for that one. But what I will say is, there's enough fans and parents and everything else. Like last year, for example, that ticket was $300.
Yeah.
Which you could take that $300 and it bought your way into every other women's game combined from what you paid for the UConn game at home to see Paige Beckers. And of course now AZ Fudd is likely going to be a top 2 or 3 pick in the 2026 WNBA draft. Sarah Strong is going to be a starter in the WNBA. If she's not a top 5 pick when she's eligible, I think it's in 2028. Yeah. The list goes on. I mean, I didn't do this, and T. Martin, T. Baker, who does a women's basketball podcast called Built to Ball, which you should be tuning into, particularly if you're listening to this podcast. We probably could have done an all Big East team just with the Connecticut starting 5 and with their 6th player, compared to all of the great other players in the Big East. You obviously don't want to do that because you don't want to be UConn heavy, But you talk about they have players up and down their roster who are amongst the best in the game and the best in the Big East. So in terms of those games, again, the goal is to be competitive. The goal is not to, like, unfortunately, what happened Martin Luther King weekend in earlier in 2025, when Seton Hall loses a 60-point game against Connecticut, and people are like, "What the heck is this team?" This is where the third place team in the Big East ends up against the best team in the Big East, losing by 60 points. Again, and on the one hand, there's no shame in losing to Beckers and Fudd and Strong and Ashley.
But you got to keep it closer. You got to keep it.
Yeah,
closer.
you can't afford. If it's 76-56, okay, fine. You want to be sort of where Creighton has been those 4 years, the last 4 years, where Creighton keeps the games in at least the 10-point range. Creighton actually had a couple of chances to pick UConn off those last 4 years. I don't know if anybody's on that level in the Big East, but again, you'd like to sort of tune the game on in the second or in the third quarter, and sort of like the game at Walsh, where okay, you're only down 8.5.
Yeah,
keep the game competitive, keep people watching. And again, these games where you're playing Connecticut are when the most eyeballs are going to be on you watching, not only in terms of fans in the stands, but also people watching on television, because you do have that big UConn audience, and you have the audience of women's basketball fans in general who watch every UConn game.
Yeah.
Just because, again, they are probably going to be the number one team in the country when the season starts.
Well, it's the Sports Center effect. I know Sports Center is not the same as it was in the 90s and the early 2000s, but though these are that's the game that you're going to actually see your highlights out there if you're the Seton Hall Pirates. You're not, with all due respect to St. John's, when St. John's and Seton Hall match it up, unless something crazy is going on, you're probably not going to see those highlights on a half-hour recap show of the national sports.
Although there's a better chance of that happening now that these games are going to be on ESPN Plus.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I guess I'm going to the old school Rich Eisen, Stuart Scott kind of thing. It's like bam, 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 highlight, 30 minutes. It's not what it is now, where you see Stephen A. Smith 48 times.
I hate to say the most likely highlight you'll see is AZ Fudd hitting a dime to Sarah Strong for an easy layup, and that's going to be.
And then you see like either Tarasi or Page sitting on the sidelines, and they're referencing them and all that. So that's those are definitely important games. Do you see an important stretch for this team? Because I'm really looking at after that second UConn game, that Georgetown, Creighton, St. John's, Marquette, 3 out of the 4 are on the road. Creighton's going to be good. You said with their coach, they're going to develop. He's a good coach. They're going to be tougher in February than they probably are in December. But then you go on the road, and you picked Marquette as your number 2 to T as well.
Yeah. Yes.
So let's say that's a consensus number 2 team. You got to take up the win with Georgetown, right? You got to beat St. John's, but you've got to win the other 2 games. I think that's for most important. I wouldn't say important, but one of the most vital stretches for a chance in March. Do you agree?
I think ideally you want to win 13, at least 13 Big East games.
Yeah.
And maybe closer to 15 or 16. And it's shocking to put that type of number out there. And I'm sure that, if Coach Bozzella is listening to this, he's going to have a panic attack when I mentioned that type of number. But, let's think about it. Take the 2 UConn games away, and then you're down to 18. Now, again, it's key after that to hold home court at Walsh. It's key that you try of the other 9 games. There's no reason why Seton Hall can't win at least 8 of them. Yeah. Because, again, the way travel is, you're familiar with your building. You should be able to shoot better than your opponents in that building. Now, of course, a team like Marquette, I think Marquette actually won at Seton Hall last season, unfortunately. So, it's not like it's as good as a setting as Walsh is. It's not like teams haven't come in and picked Seton Hall off there. And I think there's a revenge factor. That game against Marquette at Walsh, by the way, is January the 14th, middle of the week. So that's a game you want to circle on your calendar as a game which might make or break an NCAA tournament resume. And I think the other important home game is all the way down. I think it's later in February, and that is February 26th. I think that's the last weekend of the regular season, or the last stretch of the regular season. I think senior night is against Villanova, another school that would like to be in the conversation for an NCAA tournament bid.
Yeah.
And again, we mentioned Jasmine Basco of Villanova already is one of the player I have and T had on our all Big East teams. Great guard. If you're a fan of women's basketball, you want to see Jasmine Basco. You want to see Skylar Forbes of Marquette. And those are the games I'm referencing as the games that you want to win. So if you get 8 or even 9 wins at home, then you're looking at winning 6 or 7 games on the road to get to a magic number. Again, let's, no, not that these aren't good teams, but look, you have to beat Xavier on the road.
Yep.
You have to beat DePaul on the road. You have to beat Providence on the road. You have to beat Butler on the road.
Yep.
You should beat St. John's and Georgetown, and that gets you to that number. Yep. And then you're down to the Creighton, Marquette, and Villanova games. And Seton Hall won at Marquette and Villanova last season.
Yeah.
So it's not like when Seton Hall marches up to Milwaukee to play in what they call the Al McGuire Center, or when they go to Villanova to play at Finneran Pavilion, that the Jada Eadeses and the Savannah Catalans have not won in that building in the recent past. So there's, again, every game, every Big East game that's not against Connecticut is a winnable game.
Yeah, I agree. I also think for them to get March, they have to do the heavy lifting in November and December in that non-conference. Like, you have to, with this, you can't rely on that the conference is going to be very strong. They have to take care of it themselves. I was watching, I know this is our competitor in theory, Field of 68, the DTF, and they did a Big East preview today, and for the men's side, and that is what the conference has to hit, a home run on both the men and the women's side, that they have to be stronger in the non-conference segment for this conference to remain a power conference. Do you agree or disagree?
When I said in the article this week about the women's side, which I think is something which people are not noticing, is that when Seton Hall, Marquette, and Villanova have all retained their best players, Eads, Forbes, and Basco.
Yep.
That's a sign that more money must be going into player retention at those schools who are theoretically supposed to be the second tier of the Big East on the women's side. I mean, we know Creighton didn't have players leak out of their program. And when Jim Flannery's players get older, they're likely to stay around.
Yeah.
Because I think that's the mindset and the culture out of Creighton. And then it's a question. And the other point I made in the article was that, what about the emerging programs that have been consistently at the bottom of the Big East? Yeah. Georgetown, for example, T loves Georgetown. He's already spoken. He did a podcast episode with Georgetown coach Daryl Haney that people should listen to.
He likes outside dogs.
He's a big, right.
That's what I picked up. He likes outside dogs.
Big fan. Yeah, and Georgetown's got some stuff to work with. They had a very good season 2 years ago. There's no reason to think that Georgetown's not going to be competitive. And Butler. Yeah. Butler's another interesting program. Austin Parkinson is the coach there. He's coming into his 3rd season. That's another program that you would think, because They love their basketball out in Indianapolis. If they get the type of support that they can start to get the support that the men get out there, and again, you throw a few dollars into the mix. Parkinson can build better talent and get Butler to a point where they're in the conversation for the top half of the league. Again, if those programs get better, then that enhances the metrics that the NCAA tournament selection committee, you talked about taking care of business in the which funny was Butler did sort of take care of business in the non-conference the last couple of seasons. I think they beat Indiana, which was a very good win for their program on the women's side. Unfortunately, they didn't parlay it very well when Big East play took place, and they couldn't take advantage of it. But, again, hopefully, some of the stuff that Butler's been doing over the past couple of years under Parkinson starts clicking. And then, shout out to Joe Tartamella at St. John's, whose teams are always competitive, even if they're not near or at the top of the conference. If he's not in the top half, St. John's is never an easy out because he just has a toughness about them, that they're basically like, we're New York City kids, or we're playing in New York. They're not New York City kids, but we're from New York City. We're tough. We don't want people marching in the Carnesecca Arena and walking all over us. We're going to make you earn it. And, some of Seton Hall's toughest games over the past 10 years have been matchups between Bozzella and Tartamella at St. John's. So, the bones are there for the Big East to be a better conference. Hopefully now that there's a little bit more money because, the House settlement has allowed you to do more direct revenue sharing. And then the latest media deal has pumped a little more money, a little more revenue coming in each of these programs, so that, let's say last year, almost everybody not named Connecticut and maybe Creighton had next to nothing to spend. Yeah. Now you have a little bit more money to spend, and that allows you to retain your players more, and that allows you to do better work in the transfer portal and to just build these programs up. I don't know if the Big East will ever get to the SEC's level in terms of, you talk about South Carolina, Texas, LSU, Mississippi State. The list goes on about, how great programs are and how many Final Fours those schools in the SEC get. I don't know if we'll ever get to that level, but you can certainly get to the level where you're the second best conference in women's basketball.
All right, fair enough. All right, Patrick, when we come back, we will talk about a giant recruit that committed. Welcome back to Pirate Vibes on the Big East Energy Network, brought to you by Osabasa Spice. Big news came over the last week. What is it, about 8 days ago? Tony Bozzella got his second commit from the class of 2026. Obviously, I did an episode on URA a couple weeks ago. I think it was about a month ago. And Shamira Morton, the class of 2026, comes over from Mississippi, a 6'3" forward. There's a scouting report there. But how great is it that they continue to swing for the fences all throughout the entire country with their recruiting?
Obviously, you would like to see more local players, but as opposed to men's basketball, where, let's say the New York metropolitan area was the place to go for decades to get the best players in the country. I think on the women's side, they play better basketball in other parts of the country than the New York metropolitan area. So, when we just talked at the end of the last segment about how the Southeastern Conference is the dominant conference in women's basketball. And that's sort of where the best players are. And I think it's just a matter of you get more exposure to women's basketball down. You get to see LSU. You get to see South Carolina. You get to see Texas. You get to see Tennessee. So I think that when you're talking about a player like Morton, who comes out of Mississippi, that's just something where they, whereas let's say high school girls who are in athletics might gravitate towards soccer in this part of the country or lacrosse, basketball.
Well, you guys have field hockey. You guys have field hockey, correct?
Yeah, we have it. I don't think it's really.
Well, it's not even offered down here in Georgia. Like I'm close to Mississippi, so like you guys have more.
Lacrosse is definitely a sport which is definitely a lot bigger up here than it would be down south. I think basically basketball is the sport.
Yep.
If you're a female athlete, down in the south.
And softball.
Yeah, softball. That's true. I forgot about softball. But the point is that that's just something where it's easier to grab it. It's just the best players. I think if you're talking about the proportion of the best players, a lot of them come from the South.
Yeah.
So in that sense, getting a player like Morton from the South, from SEC territory, is another plus. Another thing which is important is that she's 6'3". Yeah. We were talking preparing for this. If Tony Bozzella has a blind spot recruiting wise, it's recruiting bigs.
Well, it's not a blind spot anymore because Ura was 6'2", 6'3" too. So the class that's there right now is Zahara Bishop, the freshman. That was more guard orientated. While this class for 2026, they're going after bigs, and I think it's a perfect blend because you get your guards in there, right? And as long as you can retain it, and he came on the show and he said that the transfer portal, the number one thing is to keep the people that you want to keep, right? Take care of your people. Jada Eads, right? Jada Eads will only be a junior next year. Remember that. So you're set on guards. You got Zahara Bishop, who, from all accounts that I've talked to, people that have been around the program, that's a name to watch out for. But now you're getting the bigs to finish it off, and maybe in 2 years, you've got a pretty solid program, almost like what you were just talking about in the previous segment, how Creighton kept players for a long period of time and fit your system. And if Bozzella can get bigs now, look out, Big East, right?
Yeah, I think bigs is taller players are, if everybody not Connecticut, and to a lesser extent Creighton, has sort of struggled in getting quality big players in the Big East. But I think that, if you're Seton Hall and you're starting to score on some of these top level 6'3", 6'4" players, that's a good foundation to work on. And then you sort of fill the rest of the gaps as it's there, because again, the old cliche that everyone uses is that you can't teach height. Yeah. So, if you're 6'2", 6'3", and you've got the ability to play that position, that's something that you don't have to worry about. Then you can build the rest of your team around big players like the two that Seton Hall has coming in starting in 2026.
Yeah, definitely. Do you expect Bozzella to keep recruiting, or do you think, because obviously this freshman class is a big freshman class, a lot of the transfers outside of Valenzuela and Jordana are younger classmen. Do you expect him to keep going, or do you think he's saving those roster spots for a transfer portal? If he has a good, strong season here, now you just go add a piece here, piece there, because, like I said, a couple of them are going to be leaving after this season.
I mean, you never know. Again, that's sort of just one thing. I hate to say it, but I'm sure if you went back 3 years, he would have loved to have had Lauren Park Lane for her last season. And unfortunately, her last season ended up at Mississippi State. Yeah. So, the best laid plans you have for a 2 or 3 year plan with your team, unfortunately, in this day and age, go out the window. Yeah. So you never know. Again, you never know because, to get back to the Southeastern Conference, those women's programs, particularly the South Carolinas and the LSUs, I look at what LSU did. LSU picked off the leading scorer from South Carolina, of all places.
Yeah.
So you just never know. And they unfortunately have a history of doing it. They decimated DePaul 3 years ago with Anisha Morrow, who I think ended up playing in Washington. And I'm going to get her team wrong, but the point is, Anisha Morrow was a WNBA level talent who was killing it at DePaul until Kim Mulkey decided she wanted Anisha Morrow to kill it at LSU, and that's where Morrow finished her career. So if you've got the goods, I mean, Villanova lost one of their best players a few years ago, Lucy Olson. So almost everybody not named Connecticut has had an elite player get picked off by somebody in the SEC or even somebody in the Big Ten. So you've got to always be ready. Hopefully, when we're coming into next March or April, Coach Bozzella doesn't have as many spots to fill because he's managed to keep most of this roster. With the 2 or 3 recruits he's bringing in this season, he'll only have a few spaces to fill out of the portal, as opposed to in recent years where he's had to bring in 6, 7, 8 girls every season to fill the roster.
Yeah. Well, I know I mentioned this earlier, but his mission, he said the biggest thing about the transfer was retention. If he can retain the players, then he's going to be fine building a system. So I just think there's a level of excitement with this program because I think they do have a vision. I know we talk on the men's side about the Shaw vision. We got to come up with some name with Bozzella, his vision, because it seems like they have a carefully laid out plan and it's different than what traditionally Seton Hall has had. Is that a fair assumption? Well, I know the game's changed too, so I guess it's tough to judge 2015 to 2025.
Again, to be honest, if you go in the history of the history of Tony Bozzella at Seton Hall, he thrived in the Connecticut less Big East.
Yeah, everyone did.
Well, not everyone, but he won back-to-back Big East titles.
Yeah,
and made 2 straight NCAA tournaments in the Connecticut less Big East in, I think it was 2015 and 2016. So, in that sense, he knows how to build a very good program. The question is, can he take the next step to make them an NCAA tournament team more often than not? Yeah. And he's not quite there. He hasn't been there, even though he's had Jada Eads. He's had Lauren Park Lane. He had Faith Mazonis. He could build he could bring in 2 or 3 good players, but to be a consistent NCAA threat every year and to make more tournaments than not, you've got to have 6 or 7 really good players. Creighton has had that over the last 4 years. I think Marquette's got that this year in terms of those non-Connecticut schools. Of course, then who knows, as much as Gino Auriemma says he's going to coach until he drops, who knows how long he's got at Connecticut and whether or not they take a step back when he eventually leaves Connecticut. And how much of a window does Tony Bozzella or any of those other coaches have when Connecticut's trying to, find their footing when Auriemma eventually leaves? Maybe he wins the 13th title, goes undefeated this season, and says, you know what? I've won 13 championships. I've had 7 undefeated seasons. What else am I going to do? Although I would probably try to hang around as long as Sarah Strong.
Yeah.
The next 2 years, Sarah Strong's going to be
well.
there.
He's on record saying that he's going to stay until he stops getting great players. But they have generational players all the time. So is he ever going to stop? We really don't know because it just the lineage of UConn girls. But going back,
Father Time is undefeated though.
Father Time is undefeated. Going back to Seton Hall, how do you think? Briefly, I know you put them third. How do you think this team will be able to navigate the season? I know we're going to touch in preview quickly. Do you see this team as an NCAA team?
Yes.
Awesome.
I
Me too.
I think that's the standard which Tony Bozzella is working towards. I
Yep.
think they will handle the non-conference. I think they'll get the wins that they have to get in the non-conference that they
I'll be
need.
at the NC State game, just to let you know. That's the only time they come down here. I'll be up there in Raleigh in the month.
That's of course that's the one game they're going to have the hardest time with.
Yeah, that's the toughest game on the schedule outside of UConn, right?
Well,
that
that's
will be
right. And then I think if you walk into, now they only play 9 non-conference games, which is
weird.
unusual.
Yeah.
That's sort of something where he couldn't make the connections he needed to get other games. And I think one thing that he told me back in August was he didn't want to play games for the sake of playing games. So that he's kept this non-conference schedule pretty tight.
Yeah.
But almost every game outside of St. Peter's, which is opening night, is a quality opponent.
Yeah.
So you pick off 6 or 7 of those heading in the Big East. Heading into that Villanova game, because you've got that Butler game in the middle of all those. But heading into that Villanova game, you pick off 6 or 7 of those good non-conference opponents, and then you tack on those 14 or 15 Big East wins that you need, and then you do some damage in the Big East tournament. And I don't think there's any way they keep Seton Hall out this year, which is what they did last year.
Yeah, definitely. All right, Patrick. Maybe we'll see Tim Best next week, and we'll talk a little women's basketball.
I don't know what we'll see what the time. Eventually he'll be talk. Yeah, he's as big a fan as women's basketball. He was probably a bigger fan of women's basketball than I was. So, that's sort of something where, I'm sure he'll have some good insights about women's basketball when we pick that topic up again.
Awesome. All right, Patrick, stay true, stay blue, and vibe on.
Ahoy there! Ahoy, me hearty!